She adopted 5 boys nobody wanted. 25 years later, they did the unthinkable. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. Have you ever wondered what legacy truly means? Is it a name carved on a building, a fortune amassed in a bank account, or something quieter, something deeper? We live in a world that often mistakes the noise of wealth for the substance of worth. It's a story we see play out in big cities and small towns all over the world. A story of judgment, of underestimation, and sometimes, if we're lucky, a story of profound and satisfying vindication. Today's story is about that kind of legacy. It's about a woman named Martha, a town called Oakhaven, and 5 boys that nobody, absolutely nobody wanted. It's a story that took 25 years to unfold, and it ends with an act so unthinkable, it would not only save a town, but redefine its very soul. Stick around, because this is a story about how the quietest hands can build the strongest foundations, and how the most discounted people can possess the greatest value. The town of Oakhaven was proud of its heritage, a pride that often curdled into a kind of suffocating prejudice. It was a place of old money and older opinions, where family names were like titles and newcomers were subjects of intense, whispered scrutiny. At the apex of this social pyramid sat Richard Sterling. Sterling wasn't just a resident. He was Oakhaven's self-appointed king. His family had founded the local bank generations ago, and he had leveraged that inheritance into a sprawling real estate empire that was slowly remaking the town in his own glossy, superficial image. He was a man who moved with the unthinking confidence of someone who had never been told no. His voice a permanent, condescending drawl that seemed to appraise and dismiss everything it touched. He lived in a sprawling mansion on the hill, a modern glass and steel monstrosity that looked down, quite literally, on the more traditional, humbler homes of the valley below. Into this carefully curated, socially stratified world came Martha Evans, a widow in her late 50s with a quiet demeanor and eyes that held a story no one in Oakhaven cared to read. She bought a modest, slightly worn-down house on a few acres of land on the edge of town, a property Sterling himself had dismissed as unremarkable. Martha was the antithesis of everything Oakhaven, and especially Richard Sterling, valued. She dressed in practical, simple clothes. Her car was old but immaculately maintained. She spoke little, and when she did, her words were economical and direct. The town gossips tried to piece together her story, but found little to work with. They learned she was a widow, that her husband had been in the military, and that she had been a nurse. This meager information only confirmed their assessment. She was ordinary, unimportant, a non-entity. Then, Martha did something that shifted her from a curiosity to a pariah. She adopted, not one cherubic infant, but 5 older boys from the state's overburdened foster care system. 5 boys officially labeled as hard to place. They arrived one overcast afternoon in a state-owned van, a collection of scowls, bruises, and defiant silence. There was Leo, the oldest at 12, with a wiry frame and eyes that darted everywhere, assessing threats. There was Sam, 11, whose silence was a heavy, sorrowful blanket. Caleb, 10, who stuttered and flinched at loud noises. And the twins, Marcus and Ben, 8 years old, a whirlwind of unchanneled energy and anger, who communicated more with their fists than their words. They were, in the eyes of Oakhaven, a pack of wild things, delinquents in training. The whispers turned from dismissive to hostile. "What is she thinking?" they'd murmur at the general store. "Bringing that element into our town." Richard Sterling was more direct. He saw Martha's new family not just as a social blight, but as a direct threat to the property values of his adjacent, planned luxury development. To him, these boys were human graffiti, scarring his perfect canvas. Martha seemed oblivious to the storm of disapproval she had caused. She greeted the boys not with saccharine pity, but with a quiet, firm sense of purpose. As they tumbled out of the van, a jumble of limbs and distrust, she stood on her porch, her hands not clasped in anxiety, but resting calmly at her sides. She looked at each of them, her gaze lingering for a moment, seeing not their case files, not their past traumas, but the flicker of potential buried deep beneath. "Welcome home," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The rules are simple. You respect this house, you respect each other, and you respect yourselves. Dinner is at 6. Sharp." The boys stared, waiting for the catch. But there was none. There was only Martha, a woman whose unassuming exterior concealed a will of iron and a heart with more room than anyone in Oakhaven could possibly imagine. The town had drawn its lines, and Martha and her 5 unwanted boys were firmly on the outside. The unspoken hostility of Oakhaven soon found its voice, and that voice belonged, unsurprisingly, to Richard Sterling. A month after the boys arrived, a town hall meeting was called to discuss Sterling's proposal for the Oakhaven Pines luxury estates, a development that bordered Martha's property. It was a pretense. The true agenda became clear when Sterling, standing at the podium with a smug grin, turned the discussion toward what he called community standards and property value preservation. He didn't mention Martha by name at first, instead speaking in condescending generalities about irresponsible additions to the community and the risks of introducing unstable elements. The crowd, composed of his allies and those too intimidated to oppose him, murmured in agreement. Then, he looked directly at Martha, who sat quietly in the back row. "Mrs. Evans," he began, his tone dripping with false magnanimity. "We all admire your charitable spirit. Truly. But Oakhaven is a delicate ecosystem. We have a certain standard. And while your intentions may be noble, you have to understand the concern. You've brought 5 troubled youths into our community, right next to where families will be investing their life savings." He paused for effect. "So, I want to make a public offer as a gesture of goodwill. I will buy your property. I'll even give you 10% above market value. You could take your project somewhere more suitable. Everyone wins. You get a fresh start, and the community's integrity is preserved." The room was silent, all eyes on Martha. They expected her to be flustered, intimidated, grateful. The 5 boys, whom she had brought along so they could see how the town worked, sat beside her, fidgeting. Leo's jaw was tight, his fists clenched. Sam seemed to shrink into his seat. Martha, however, remained perfectly still. She let the silence stretch, a quiet rebuke to Sterling's theatricality. When she finally rose to her feet, her posture was erect, her gaze unwavering. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice as calm and clear as it had been on her porch. "My home is not for sale. My family is not a project, and my sons are not for sale at any price." She then turned, gathered her boys with a simple nod, and walked out of the hall, leaving behind a stunned silence and a faintly sputtering Richard Sterling, whose public gesture of dominance had just been so quietly and completely dismantled. That night was a turning point. The battle lines were no longer unspoken. They were etched in stone. For Sterling, it became a personal vendetta. For Martha, it became a quiet declaration of war, one she would fight not with anger, but with relentless, methodical love and discipline. The early years were a crucible. The boys tested every boundary. They fought, they broke things, they ran away, only to be found by Martha sitting patiently in her old car at the end of the road, waiting. She never yelled. Instead, she introduced a system, a structure that was both rigid and reassuring. Its roots were in her past as an army nurse, a past she never spoke of, but that informed her every action. Morning started at 0600. Chores were assigned on a rotating roster she called the duty roster. Each task, from mending a fence to weeding the garden, was to be done with precision. "If a job is worth doing, it's worth doing right," she would say, inspecting a wobbly fence post with a critical eye. "A weak post compromises the whole line." It was a lesson about fences, and it was a lesson about life. She taught them skills the town dismissed as menial. How to change the oil in a car, how to patch drywall, how to read a wiring diagram, how to administer basic first aid. She bought old, broken-down engines for them to take apart and rebuild, teaching them the logic of systems, the importance of every single gasket and bolt. To Oakhaven, It looked like she was raising a crew of laborers. To Martha, she was forging self-sufficiency. The town's ostracism was constant. The Sterling kids, inheriting their father's arrogance, led the charge. Martha's boys were never invited to birthday parties. They were picked last for teams in school, often accompanied by snickers about them being jailbirds. When a window was broken at the school, they were the first ones questioned by the principal. But Martha had prepared them. "Their words are noise," she'd tell Leo, whose temper was the quickest to flare. "Don't let their noise distract you from your work. Focus on what you can control. Your actions, your integrity." She turned their isolation into a strength, their small family unit into an unbreakable team. They learned to rely on each other because they had no one else. Martha was building something piece by piece, day by day. It wasn't a luxury estate of glass and steel, but a fortress of character, built from 5 broken stones that the world had thrown away. The crucible of their early years slowly forged the boys into young men. The adolescent years in Oakhaven were a relentless gauntlet of subtle and overt prejudice, almost all of it tracing back to the long shadow of Richard Sterling. His own son, Richard Jr., a boy who wore his father's entitlement like a tailored jacket, made it his personal mission to torment Martha's family. He and his clique of wealthy friends would drive by Martha's property, yelling insults from their expensive cars. They engineered situations at school to make the brothers look like bullies or thieves, knowing the administration was predisposed to believe them. One particular incident became a piece of local legend. The school was holding its annual science fair, a major event that Richard Sterling always sponsored, ensuring his son's often mediocre projects received top honors. Leo, who had developed a fascination with bridges and structural integrity after helping Martha rebuild a small wooden bridge over a creek on their property, decided to enter. He spent weeks designing and building a meticulously crafted model of a truss bridge, using principles he'd read about in books Martha had ordered for him. His model was simple, unadorned, made from balsa wood and glue, but it was incredibly strong. Richard Jr.'s project, by contrast, was a flashy, light-up volcano built from a kit. On the day of the judging, just before the panel arrived, Richard Jr. accidentally stumbled into Leo's table, sending the bridge model crashing to the floor, where it shattered into 100 pieces. The teachers on duty, intimidated by the Sterling name, simply told a heartbroken Leo he should have been more careful where he placed his project. Leo's face was a mask of fury and grief. He was ready to explode. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Martha. She had come to see his project. She didn't look at Richard Jr. or the teachers. She looked at the wreckage on the floor, then at her son's face. "Leo," she said, her voice low and steady. "What does a good engineer do when a structure fails?" Leo, choking back his anger, mumbled, "He analyzes the failure, learns from it, and builds it stronger." "Exactly," Martha said. "Pick up the pieces. We'll build another one. Not for them. For you." The lesson resonated through the family. They learned not to seek validation from those who would never give it. Instead, they poured their energy into their passions, which Martha nurtured with quiet encouragement. Sam, the quiet one, found his calling after one of the twins, Marcus, fell from a tree and broke his arm. While waiting for the ambulance, Martha calmly guided Sam through the process of stabilizing the limb and treating for shock. From that day on, Sam devoured every first aid and medical book he could find, practicing splints on his brothers and becoming the family's de facto medic. Caleb, the stuttering, anxious boy, discovered a world where he could communicate without fear, the world of computers and radio waves. Martha bought him a used ham radio set from a garage sale, and Caleb spent hours in the attic, talking to people across the globe, his stutter miraculously vanishing when he was behind a microphone. He taught himself coding, network architecture, and how to make technology do his bidding. The twins, Marcus and Ben, channeled their boundless energy in different directions. Marcus fell in love with the raw power and intricate mechanics of the old tractor and backhoe Martha kept on the property. He had a natural, intuitive understanding of heavy machinery, how to operate it with finesse, and how to fix it when it broke. Ben, on the other hand, discovered a talent for organization. He was the one who managed the chore roster, who figured out the most efficient way to harvest the vegetable garden, who could take a chaotic pile of lumber and organize it by size and type in minutes. He saw systems in everything, not of machines, but of people and resources. Oakhaven saw 5 misfits. Martha saw a structural engineer, a paramedic, a communications expert, a heavy equipment operator, and a logistics manager. She wasn't just raising sons, she was training a unit. And while Richard Sterling was busy erecting monuments to his own ego all over town, Martha was quietly building men of substance, their skills forged in the fire of rejection and tempered by the unwavering belief of a woman who saw what no one else could. As the boys transitioned into young adulthood, the town of Oakhaven settled into a comfortable narrative about Martha Evans and her family. They were no longer a threat, but a permanent, if slightly pitiable, fixture. The story the town told itself was that Martha's experiment had produced exactly what one would expect, a cohort of blue-collar workers, destined for lives of quiet labor on the fringes of society. They saw Marcus get a job with a regional construction company and nodded knowingly. They saw Sam training as an EMT for a neighboring county service and thought it a humble, if respectable, choice. They heard Caleb was doing some kind of freelance computer stuff from his room in Martha's house and dismissed it as a hobby. They knew Leo had gone to a state college for engineering, but assumed he'd end up as a simple municipal inspector somewhere. And Ben, who took a job managing inventory at a large warehouse a town over, was seen as having found his unremarkable niche. This narrative was immensely satisfying to Richard Sterling. He saw their paths as a complete validation of his own worldview. They hadn't become criminals, as he'd once feared, but they hadn't become anyone of importance either. They were not doctors, lawyers, or investment bankers. They were not Sterlings. He would occasionally see Martha in town, now a woman in her 70s with gray hair and the same stoic expression, and he would feel a sense of smug triumph. He had won. His Oakhaven, the Oakhaven of wealth and status, had prevailed. His own empire, meanwhile, had flourished. He had built the Oakhaven Pines, the Sterling Mall, and was now putting the finishing touches on his crowning achievement. The Sterling Gateway Bridge, a sleek, modern concrete and steel span across the Oakhaven River, designed to create a brand new entrance to the town and, more importantly, to service his upcoming ultra-luxury condominium project on the far bank. The bridge was his monument. He had famously pushed the project through the town council, overriding concerns from some older residents about its location on a floodplain and boasting about its state-of-the-art, cost-efficient design. One evening, Leo was home visiting Martha. He had just taken a job with a prestigious engineering firm that specialized in forensic structural analysis, a detail he didn't share with anyone in town. He drove over the nearly completed bridge and felt a prickle of unease. Something about the support piers seemed insufficient. The design prioritized aesthetics over the brute force resilience needed for a river that was known, historically, for violent flash floods. He mentioned it quietly to Martha. "That bridge is a monument to ego, not engineering," he said, looking at the blueprints he'd pulled up on his laptop. He cut corners on the deep supports. He saved money on the rebar density. It'll hold up fine in a normal spring thaw. But in a 50-year storm? Or a 100-year storm? I wouldn't park my car on it. Martha just nodded, a familiar, knowing look in her eyes. Pride builds shaky ground, Leo. You know that. The boys continued to hone their skills in their respective fields, far from the prying eyes of Oakhaven. Sam became a lead paramedic, an expert in mass casualty triage. Caleb built a reputation in the cybersecurity world as a brilliant, if eccentric, network architect who could build secure, independent communication systems from scratch. Marcus was now a master operator of everything from cranes to bulldozers, renowned for his calm precision in delicate situations. And Ben had become a logistical genius, managing complex supply chains for a national disaster relief nonprofit. They were a team of hidden masters, their true capabilities a secret kept by the 5 of them and the quiet woman who had raised them. Oakhaven saw 5 laborers. The world was about to see a finely tuned, rapid response unit. The town, basking in the glow of Sterling's superficial progress, was utterly blind to the two storms gathering on the horizon, one of water and one of men. The 25th anniversary of the boys' arrival in Oakhaven was a quiet affair. Martha made her signature pot roast, and for the first time in years, all 5 of her sons were home to share it. Leo was 37 now, Sam 36, Caleb 35, and the twins, Marcus and Ben, were 33. The house was filled with the easy camaraderie of men who had been through fire together. They didn't speak of the past much, of the insults or the isolation. They didn't need to. It was the bedrock upon which their bond was built. They spoke of their jobs, of the challenges and successes that Oakhaven knew nothing about. Leo talked about a recent dam inspection, Sam about a difficult multi-car pileup, Caleb about a new encrypted communication protocol he was designing. Marcus joked about lifting a multi-ton MRI machine into the top floor of a hospital, and Ben described the logistical nightmare of getting potable water to a hurricane-stricken island. In the middle of it all, Martha sat, her face etched with a quiet, profound pride. This was her legacy. Not a building, not a bank account, but these 5 capable, honorable men. Outside, the wind began to pick up. A storm that had been a swirl of color on the weather maps for days was now making its presence known. The forecast had been dire, a historic weather event, the meteorologists called it. But in Oakhaven, under the confident proclamations of Richard Sterling and his hand-picked town officials, there was a sense of complacent invincibility. Our infrastructure is state-of-the-art. The mayor had declared in a press conference just a day earlier, standing in front of the new Sterling Gateway Bridge. Oakhaven is prepared. But the storm didn't care about press conferences. It arrived with a fury that defied the forecasts. Rain fell not in sheets, but in solid, roaring curtains of water. The wind howled like a freight train, tearing at roofs and snapping ancient trees. The ground, already saturated from a wet spring, simply gave up. Water poured down the hillsides, turning gentle streams into raging torrents. The Oakhaven River, normally a placid ribbon of blue, began to swell with terrifying speed, its color changing to a churning, muddy brown, carrying with it uprooted trees and debris. At Martha's house, the atmosphere had shifted. Dinner was over. Caleb was on his laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens showing weather radar, emergency service frequencies, and network status maps. The official town servers just went down, he said, his voice stripped of its old stutter, now sharp and focused. And the cell tower on Sterling's Hill is offline. High winds. Leo was looking out the window towards the river, his expression grim. The water's rising too fast. The culverts downstream, the ones near the new mall, they were never designed for this volume. They'll clog and back up. The whole lower town is going to be a lake in an hour. Sam was already checking the medical supplies he always kept in his truck, laying out trauma kits on the kitchen table. Marcus and Ben stood by the window with Leo, their eyes not on the storm itself, but on the landscape, assessing it with their trained perspectives. Marcus saw the old logging roads that could be cleared for access. Ben saw the natural high points that could serve as evacuation centers. They were no longer just sons having dinner with their mother. They were a unit coming online. Then it happened. A sound, a low, groaning roar that was felt as much as heard, echoed through the valley, even over the din of the storm. A flicker of lights across the river, and then darkness. Caleb looked up from his screen. Power grid just failed on the West Bank, he said. Then his eyes widened slightly. I'm getting reports. The Sterling Gateway Bridge. It's gone. It's just gone. The symbol of Sterling's ego, the monument to Oakhaven's new era, had been the first thing to break. The town was now severed in two, a community suddenly and violently humbled by a force of nature it had been so arrogantly assured it could withstand. Chaos had arrived, and the only people truly prepared for it were the 5 boys nobody had ever wanted. The collapse of the Sterling Gateway Bridge was more than a structural failure. It was a psychological one. The town's totem of invincibility was now a mangled wreck in a raging river, and with its demise, the veneer of official competence dissolved into raw, undirected panic. The official emergency operations center, located in the basement of the town hall in the now-flooded lower district, was a disaster zone in itself. The power was out, the backup generator had been swamped, and the only communication was the frantic, crackling voice of a single deputy on a battery-powered radio, reporting scenes of escalating chaos. The mayor was stranded in his home, as useless as the press conferences he had so confidently delivered. Richard Sterling, the town's patriarch, was trapped in his glass mansion on the hill, watching the river chew away at the foundations of his precious condominium site, his phone as dead as his influence. The town of Oakhaven was, for all intents and purposes, on its own. But not everyone was panicking. At a modest house on a hill, a different kind of command center was humming to life. There was no panic here, only a quiet, focused intensity. Martha's home, built on high, solid ground with a well-maintained roof and storm windows, had become the nerve center of the only effective response Oakhaven would see. "All right," Leo said, his voice cutting through the storm's howl. He stood in the living room, now a makeshift briefing room. "Caleb, talk to me. What do we have?" Caleb, surrounded by a web of cables connecting laptops, a satellite modem, and his old ham radio, didn't look up. "I've bypassed the dead regional servers. I got a mesh network running on a closed Wi-Fi signal, piggybacking off a couple of commercial satellites. It's not fast, but it's stable. I'm monitoring emergency radio chatter from 3 counties and cross-referencing it with topographical maps to predict where the flooding will hit next. The entire Old Mill district is going to be underwater within 30 minutes. That includes the retirement home." Sam snapped to attention. "That's 60 residents, many non-ambulatory. The official evacuation plan for them requires the Gateway Bridge." Leo nodded grimly, "Which means there is no plan." He turned to the twins. "Marcus, the old logging road behind the ridge. Is it passable?" Marcus, who had spent his youth exploring every inch of these woods, answered immediately. "It'll be a mess of fallen trees, but the roadbed is solid rock. The old backhoe is gassed up. I can clear a path. It'll get us to the back of the mill district." "Ben," Leo continued, his tone that of a field commander, "your turn. We need to get people out and get them somewhere safe. Triage, shelter, supplies." Ben pointed to a map on the table. "This house is Point Alpha. Highest ground, structurally sound, independent well water thanks to Martha. The high school gym is the only other viable mass shelter, but it's on the other side of the river. We need to get the retirement home residents and everyone else in the lowlands to this house. Now, I'll coordinate volunteers once Caleb gets us a way to communicate with them and manage getting them sorted here. Food, blankets, medical." Sam chimed in. "I'll set up triage right here on the porch. Martha and I can handle initial assessments. We need to move the seriously injured out first, but we have no way to get them to a hospital." It was a seamless, professional exchange. There were no egos, no arguments. Each man knew his role, trusted the others implicitly, and deferred to the person whose expertise fit the immediate problem. They were a living system, a direct reflection of the thousands of lessons Martha had taught them about interdependence, precision, and doing the job right. Martha herself moved through the controlled chaos of her home with a preternatural calm. She was making coffee, laying out blankets, checking the batteries and the flashlights. She was the steady, silent core around which this incredible operation was spinning into existence. She watched her sons, the engineer, the paramedic, the communicator, the operator, the logistician, and saw not 5 individuals, but a single, powerful fist clenched and ready to strike back at the chaos that had engulfed the town that had for so long refused to see them. The operation began without a single order from any official authority. It was a ghost mission, executed in the heart of the storm. Marcus was the first to move out. The roar of the old backhoe's diesel engine was a defiant sound against the wind. With Leo providing directions over a ruggedized radio Caleb had configured, Marcus plunged into the darkness of the woods. He worked with a terrifying grace, his machine an extension of his own body. He wasn't just clearing a path. He was performing surgery on the landscape, using the backhoe's bucket to nudge massive fallen oaks aside, to shore up sections of the road that were threatening to wash away, all in near total darkness, guided by the machine's headlights and his own innate understanding of the terrain. Within an hour, he radioed back, his voice calm over the static. The logging road is open. It's rough, but it'll hold. I'm at the ridge overlooking the retirement home. It's bad down there, Leo. Water's already on the first floor. Back at the house, Ben was on the comms network Caleb had established, a system that now linked a dozen or so stunned but willing neighbors who had power for generators. Ben's voice was authoritative but calm, turning panicked civilians into a functional volunteer force. Jerry, you have a four-wheel drive truck? Good. Get to the old Henderson place and pick them up. Maria, start collecting blankets and dry clothes. Everyone who can walk, meet at the top of Mill Street. Sam and his team are coming for you. Sam, meanwhile, had deputized two of the neighbors with basic first aid training and was leading a small convoy of trucks, including his own well-stocked vehicle, down the freshly cleared logging road. They arrived at the Oakhaven Senior Care Home to a scene of sheer terror. The power was out, the staff were overwhelmed, and elderly residents were trapped in their rooms as brown water swirled around their beds. Sam didn't hesitate. He waded into the building, his team behind him, performing rapid triage. You can walk. Go with this man now. Ma'am, we're going to carry you. Sir, your leg is broken. We're going to splint it right here, and you'll be the first one in the truck. He was a beacon of calm authority in the chaos, his hands sure and his voice reassuring. While the rescue of the elderly was underway, Leo was tackling another impending disaster. He had identified a small, earthen dam on a creek upstream from a residential neighborhood that was showing signs of imminent failure. A collapse would send a secondary wall of water through a dozen homes. He arrived alone, in the driving rain, equipped with nothing but a powerful flashlight, a shovel, and his profound understanding of hydraulics. He saw the problem immediately. A debris clog at the primary spillway was forcing the water to overtop the dam's weakest point. He spent the next hour in waist-deep, freezing water, single-handedly clearing the clog, using the shovel as a lever to dislodge a massive tree trunk that was blocking the flow. The water level dropped, the pressure eased. He had saved a neighborhood, and no one but his brothers on a radio even knew he was there. The peak of the night's vindication, however, came with an unexpected call routed through Caleb's network. It was a panicked, garbled plea from a woman on Sterling Hill. It was Richard Sterling's wife. Their mansion, which they had believed to be unassailable, was cut off by a mudslide that had blocked their driveway, and the rising waters of a diverted creek were now flooding their ground floor. Richard Sterling, the king of Oakhaven, was trapped and terrified. Leo made the decision. Marcus, you're the closest. Can you get to him? On my way, was the simple reply. Marcus navigated the huge backhoe through the treacherous, washed-out lanes of the wealthy district. He arrived to find the Sterling mansion, a symbol of arrogant modernity, looking like a beached, dying whale. The power was out, and the lower floors were inundated. Using the backhoe's bucket with the delicacy of a surgeon's scalpel, he cleared a path through the mud and debris. He then lowered the bucket to a second-story balcony where the Sterling family was huddled. Richard Sterling, his expensive suit soaked, his face pale with fear, hesitated. This was the boy he had mocked, the man he had dismissed as a lowly laborer, now offering him his only escape. Humbled and trembling, Sterling, his wife, and his son climbed into the filthy bucket of the backhoe. As Marcus lifted them to safety, their eyes met. Marcus's expression wasn't triumphant or mocking. It was just professional. He was simply doing a job that needed to be done. For Richard Sterling, that look was more devastating than any words of reproach could ever be. It was the look of pure, undeniable competence, a quality he had long preached but never truly possessed. As the first gray light of dawn broke through the bruised and battered clouds, the storm began to recede, leaving behind a landscape of devastation. The Oakhaven River was still a swollen, angry beast, but the rain had softened to a drizzle. The true scale of the damage was now visible. Homes flooded, roads washed away, and the town's proud infrastructure in ruins. It was into this scene that the outside world finally arrived. Convoys of state police cruisers, National Guard trucks, and FEMA vehicles rolled in, expecting to find a town in complete disarray, awaiting rescue. Instead, they found something that stunned them into silence. They found order. They found a network of volunteers working with quiet efficiency. They found a makeshift command center in a modest home on a hill, a place that was running more smoothly than their own mobile headquarters. And they found a fully operational field hospital on a wide porch, where a woman in her late 70s and a team led by a calm, authoritative paramedic were treating the injured. The man in charge, a grizzled National Guard general named Peterson, a veteran of a dozen disaster zones, stepped out of his Humvee and surveyed the scene at Martha's house. He saw a logistics station run by a young man named Ben, directing trucks laden with food and water. He saw a communications hub run by another young man, Caleb, that was feeding real-time damage assessments to the incoming crews. He saw a massive backhoe driven by a man named Marcus, already clearing the main road into town. He saw an engineer, Leo, briefing the state's own structural teams, pointing out critical weaknesses in the town's remaining bridges and dams. General Peterson was a man who understood chains of command, and it was immediately clear to him who had been in charge here. He walked up to Leo, who was pointing out the flawed design of the collapsed Sterling Bridge on a set of blueprints. "Who the hell are you people?" Peterson asked, not with accusation, but with a deep, professional respect. Leo simply turned. "We're the locals," he said. The full story came out over the next few hours. The general and the FEMA coordinator listened, their expressions shifting from disbelief to profound admiration, as the brothers, calmly, factually, and without a hint of boastfulness, explained what they had done. They detailed the rescue of the retirement home, the stabilization of the earthen dam, the establishment of the communication network, the clearing of the roads. When they finished, Peterson was silent for a long moment. He then turned to his aide. "I want these men to act as our primary civilian liaisons. Their plans, their assessments, they are now our operational blueprint. Get them whatever they need." Vindication had arrived, not in the form of an apology from the townsfolk, but as a formal recognition of competence from the highest authority. The falling action for Richard Sterling was swift and brutal. Once rescued, he had tried to reassert his authority, barking orders that the professionals from the Guard and FEMA simply ignored. The investigation into the Sterling Gateway Bridge collapse was a public crucifixion. Leo's informal analysis was confirmed and expanded upon by state investigators. Shoddy materials, design shortcuts, and criminally negligent oversight all traced directly back to Sterling's relentless cost-cutting. He was not only facing financial ruin from lawsuits, but a potential criminal indictment for involuntary manslaughter for the two people whose cars had been on the bridge when it fell. He became a pariah overnight, the man who built a monument to his ego that had cost lives and nearly destroyed the town. The townsfolk, meanwhile, underwent a painful but necessary transformation. The initial whispers of thanks to Martha's family turned into a chorus of open, shame-faced gratitude. People who had once crossed the street to avoid them now brought them food, offered to help clean up, or just stood by, shaking their hands with tears in their eyes. They had seen who ran into the fire. They had seen whose skills mattered when the lights went out. The Sterling name, once the gold standard in Oakhaven, was now mud. The Evans name, once a whispered insult, had become the definition of a hero. Martha watched it all from her porch, saying little. She didn't need to. Her son's actions had spoken more eloquently than any words she could ever offer. The quiet, 25-year war was over. She had won. In the months that followed the Great Storm, Oakhaven began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. But it wasn't just rebuilding its bridges and homes. It was rebuilding its very identity. The old social hierarchy, built on the sandy foundation of wealth and lineage, had been washed away in the flood. A new foundation was being laid, one of competence, community, and character. And the architects of this new Oakhaven were the 5 men who had saved it. The town council, in a unanimous vote that would have been unthinkable just a year prior, offered Leo the position of lead consultant on all municipal infrastructure projects. He accepted on the condition that all plans and contracts would be subject to a transparent public review. His first official act was to design a new gateway bridge, a structure that was less an aesthetic statement and more a testament to resilient, honest engineering. It was wider, stronger, with support piers sunk deep into the bedrock. It was a bridge built to endure. Sam was hired to completely overhaul the county's emergency medical services, creating a new rapid response protocol based on the triage system he had implemented during the storm. He established a volunteer medic corps, training ordinary citizens in life-saving skills, ensuring Oak Haven would never be so helpless again. Caleb was given a contract to design and implement a new, robust communications infrastructure for the town, a redundant system of fiber, satellite, and radio that would be the envy of municipalities 10 times its size. Marcus and Ben co-founded a nonprofit called the Oak Haven Recovery Corps, using their expertise in heavy machinery and logistics to manage the cleanup and rebuilding efforts, putting dozens of locals to work and ensuring that the aid money flowing into the town was used efficiently and for the benefit of all, not just a select few. Richard Sterling was gone. His mansion was sold to pay off a fraction of his legal debts, and he and his family left Oak Haven in disgrace, a footnote in the town's history. The new Oak Haven was a place where what you could do mattered more than who you were. It was a town where the children of the old elite worked side by side with everyone else, filling sandbags or learning CPR. The culture of condescension had been replaced by a culture of cooperation. One crisp autumn evening, a year after the storm, Martha sat on her porch swing, a warm blanket over her knees. The 5 brothers were all there, gathered for a simple backyard barbecue. The sound of their laughter, easy and genuine, drifted through the cool air. She watched them, her engineer, her paramedic, her communicator, her operator, her logistician, her sons. They had faced down a generation of scorn and had answered not with bitterness, but with breathtaking competence. They had saved the very people who had shunned them. They had done the unthinkable. They had not only survived, they had reshaped their world. Leo came and sat beside her, handing her a cup of tea. He followed her gaze out over the valley, where the lights of the healing town twinkled. "You did good, Mom," he said softly. Martha smiled, a rare, full smile that lit up her face. "I just provided the tools," she replied. "You boys built the house. And that is the legacy that truly matters. It isn't etched in stone or held in a vault. It is built quietly and patiently through love, discipline, and an unwavering belief in the potential that lies dormant in every one of us, waiting for the right hands to nurture it. The world may judge you by your cover, by your past, by the labels they want to put on you. But in the end, when the storms come, the only thing that matters is the strength of your character and the substance of what you have built within yourself. What about you? Have you ever seen someone so completely underestimated, only to reveal a strength that left everyone speechless? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for listening to this story from Oak Haven.